888-957-9570. We're talking through options for the Golden State Warriors. They got some options, but as you and I have laid out, Dibbs, and I think a lot of Warrior fans are coming to the conclusion, not many of the options are necessarily great. You got some options.
Right.
Maybe some better than others, but you don't really have many great options.
Right.
And
depends on what you can get for what you want to get rid of. I mean, option one for me would be Clay on a bargain. You make a trade and keep Kuminga and get in a really good player alongside what you already have. That's a little bit of a long shot. Can you get Brandon Ingram without trading Jonathan Kuminga? And you keep Clay, you bring in Ingram, you get rid of Paul, and even if it's Wiggins, fine, and you bring everyone else back, that would be incredible. That would be option one.
Yes, you're right.
Or even Kevin Durant at that point.
It'd be option one because you're trying to win championships and you're holding out hope that you still can do it. I'm of the mind.
Oh, here we go.
This might take a while. I'm of the mind that I can't see the Warriors legitimately competing for another championship again over the next couple of years, 3-4 years at the very max, because that's all Steph Curry has left, you would imagine. At least 2 more years, but I'm not convinced that he's going to hang it up after 2 more years. He's certainly good enough to stay in the league beyond these next 2 years. However long it is, I'm not convinced that the Warriors are going to be able to legitimately compete for a championship once again. And I'm of the mind, if you're not going to be able to legitimately compete for a championship, then do not hinder your ability to be good in the future by chasing something fleeting. And I think that's what another championship in this era is. It's fleeting. So why would you go all in and hurt your chances to be decent, to be competitive, to be relevant in the NBA in the future if you feel that way? Maybe you feel differently, and that's totally fine. That's just how I feel. On the flip side, though, Dibbs, I don't think there's any room for the Warriors to dilly-dally in the middle. You gotta, the extreme, one way or the other. And as we take a look at what Oklahoma City has been able to accomplish, and there's been a lot of texters on the Xfinity mobile text line and on our YouTube chat powered by First NorCal Credit Union saying what OKC did is an anomaly. That comes from the 510. You can't duplicate what they did. And that's fair. Oklahoma City, what they've been able to do is darn near incredible. They turned a bad situation, Kevin Durant leaving, and they turned water into wine, and now they have the number 1 seed in the Western Conference, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who finished second in the MVP voting, and still a boatload of draft picks. How did they do that, Dibbs? Well, first of all, they're in a small market where you're always kind of dealing with the pressure of wondering if your current best player is going to want to stay with you, and also under the impression that you're not going to be able to acquire another legitimate star in free agency. So what do you do? When you have a star, they had Russell Westbrook. He's the one that stayed, right? Durant left. They had to trade away Harden. They didn't have to, but they chose to because they saw what was coming with Durant and Westbrook and all of that, and they made a business decision and traded away Harden. But Westbrook was the one that stayed. But even then, Oklahoma City's worried. And this is way back in the 2017 offseason. 2 years after 1 year after Kevin Durant left, that next offseason, the Warriors had just won their first championship with Kevin Durant. OKC is reading the writing on the wall. Russ has 1 year left on his contract, and they say, at the very least, we're going to make a run at this and convince Russell Westbrook to stay with us. So what do? They go out and they acquire Paul George. They traded Domantas Sabonis. Yes, Sabonis began his career in Oklahoma City, that same Sabonis that's on Sacramento now. They traded him their first-round pick the year prior, and they got Paul George. That was enough for Russ. He re-signed that same offseason to, I think, a new 5-year extension. Okay, OKC, job well done. You accomplished what you were trying to do. You weren't going to be able to acquire a star in free agency because, frankly, not a lot of people want to go to Oklahoma City. If you're of that stature and you can go to the LAs, you can go to the Miamis, you can go to the New York, you're probably not going to choose Oklahoma City. So they said, all right, we'll give up our most recent first-round pick, and we'll go get Paul George. Russ resigns as a result. They go to the playoffs, Dibbs, each of the next 2 years. But they don't win a series either of those 2 seasons. So they take stock of what they have on their roster. And they say, I don't think we're going to be able to win with this group. We're not good enough. We have 2 years worth of sample size. This isn't going to work. So what do? You look to trade Paul George. And this is where the anomaly kind of comes in, because you had an incredibly eager Steve Ballmer with the Clippers who was so dead set on acquiring both Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. Kawhi Leonard was a free agency signing from Toronto after Toronto beat the Warriors in the finals. But the way that it worked out was, according to reports, Kawhi only wanted to go to the Clippers if they also acquired Paul George. So it worked right into OKC's hands, because essentially the Clippers were like, all right, we're not going to think of this as just a Paul George trade. We're thinking of this as a Kawhi and Paul George trade. So OKC, we're willing to give you everything that we have to get those 2 stars. So OKC trades Paul George to the Clippers. The return, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who just finished second in MVP voting. They got a Miami 2021 pick from the Clippers. They acquired it on a previous trade. So that's 1 first-round pick. Another first-round pick, which became Santa Clara's Jalen Williams, who's arguably their 3rd best player, their 3rd most important player. Their trio now, it looks like, is Shai, Chet Holmgren, and Jalen Williams. They got another unprotected first from the Clippers in 2024, another in 2026. They got another Miami first-round pick, and they got rights to a 2025 Clippers pick swap. And by the way, considering the direction of OKC, I think that swap will convey, and OKC will improve their draft standing in next year's first round. Okay, so you got out, you traded away one of your veteran stars,
right,
and you got a hell of a haul in return. Now what do you do with your homegrown guy? Your guy that chose OKC and stayed, signed that extension, that guy was Russell Westbrook. But once you get rid of Paul George, you're even more realizing we're not going to be able to really win much here, so we might as well trade Russ. And I imagine that was an emotional and difficult decision for Sam Presti. Because again, Sam Presti, the GM of OKC. Because again, when you're in these situations and you have a player who's won an MVP for you, averaged a triple-double, and has been the longest tenured member of OKC, the most famous and most, you could argue, the most historic Thunder ever. I mean, the Thunder were a relatively new team. Obviously, they came from from Seattle, but in terms of the Thunder branding, Russell Westbrook, the longest tenured, maybe the most respected and well-liked and beloved Thunder ever. Because once Kevin Durant left, those fans kind of turned on him a little bit. Russ was the one that stayed. You shipped him off to Houston. What did you get back for that? You got back Chris Paul, by the way, who at that point we thought was on the downturn of his career.
Right.
You got back also 2 first-round picks and 2 future pick swaps. So you got more picks back. And then you somehow amazingly made the playoffs with Chris Paul. You upped his value, and then the next year you shipped him off to Phoenix, and you got another first-round pick back for him. And now you're sitting on an absolute gold mine of picks and young talent because you turned those picks into quality players. And some of it was drafting, some of it was using picks and going out and acquiring savvy veterans. Gordon Hayward, who they acquired at the trade deadline this year, they used some of their draft capital to do that, and they have plenty more room to do something like that. And again, I know that this is an OKC situation that is just a dream, and the Warriors would never dream about trading Stephen Curry, and I don't think it's going to happen. I don't even want it to happen because I have so much emotional baggage tied up with Stephen Curry. But when you see the way OKC turned a bad situation, we're a small market, unsure if our homegrown star wants to stay, you get him to stay and then later realize it's not working and ship him and your other star out and now you are the number 1 seed in the Western Conference, it's hard to turn an eye at what Oklahoma City has been able to accomplish. And you're probably not going to be able to get a return anywhere near that for any of the Warriors veterans. But when you consider how quick the turnaround was for OKC, it is interesting to think about how that path might work out for the Warriors.
And you say how quick, which is the part that I think is a little bit curious, because you go back to 2016 when they were, the team that lost in the Western Conference Finals in 7 to the Golden State Warriors, 2016. And that's a team that had Westbrook, and that's a team that had Kevin Durant and all the rest of it. And, they didn't have Harden anymore, but that's now 8 years. So you talk about how quick that happened. It's actually really not that quick.
Well, they still were relatively relevant.
They were a playoff team, but like you talked about, they were stuck in the middle. They were 47 wins, 48, 49, 44, and then they finally plummeted down to 22, which is really what jump-started their turnaround. Once they got really, really bad, that's when they got picks that were high enough to really make this rebuild start to happen in a faster way. And yes, the Shai Gilgeous-Alexander trade was a big piece of it. And the Chris Paul, too, getting Chris to come in, and you thought that he was toward the end of his career, and turns out he wasn't. And then you were able to turn him around. What it was about a 5-year period where you made a lot of moves. It was Paul George.
A ton of moves.
It was Gilgeous-Alexander. It was Chris Paul. It was Russell Westbrook. Steven Adams was a part of that. There was a lot of moves you made, and it took 8 years to go from where you were, which was a team that was on the doorstep of going back to the NBA Finals, to a team now that is the top seed in the West, and again, poised to maybe make a deep run in the playoffs. So it's not like it happened very quickly.
Yeah,
and
but
the other part of it, though, is if the Warriors were to try to follow that blueprint, you're talking about Steph Curry. This is not Russell Westbrook or James Harden.
It's a different situation.
Or Kevin Durant.
I agree.
These are not players that had the same imprint and the same impact on an organization. And you also are not dealing with players who are at the peak of their NBA life. Paul George, when they made that trade, he was 30 or 31, and Westbrook was about the same. And all these other players, when you made these trades, they were guys who were at the peak of their basketball life. And if the Warriors were to do it, even if they started right now today, on this day, May 10th, 2024, Steph is 36, and he's going to be 37 next year. So you don't even have the same ability to follow that blueprint as far as, making trades and acquiring picks and then trying to shore it up for what, 2030?
Yeah. No, you're right. Like, this is not an apples to apples comparison. It's more apples to oranges, because everything you laid out, the ages of the stars that you're thinking about trading away is different, and you're not going to be able to get the dream scenario that OKC had with the Paul George trade with the Clippers, where they just fell into a freaking gold mine, and it's very, very unlikely that something like that.
And give them credit for realizing that Gilgeous-Alexander was a good player. Now, did they think that he would be this good?
Probably not.
Right.
He showed something in
He averaged
in
10 a game as a rookie. He was 6th in Rookie of the Year.
Pretty decent.
Very good. And he played in every game, and he showed signs of being a good player. I don't know if he was showing signs of being this player, but you get credit when you acquire a player who is good and he turns out to be great.
Yeah.
And, they did a lot of things right. And I remember not making fun of Oklahoma City, but we always would joke around about the fact that they had like 13 first-round picks.
They
over
still
the next
do.
4 drafts. Right. Exactly.
And they've used them. They picked Chet Holmgren. They picked Jalen Williams. They picked the other Jalen Williams. Like, they have still a number of picks coming up.
Yeah, they've done great. And here they are with a very good young team, and they're right there among the last 4 teams in the West. And even if they don't advance any further, you would look at them going into next year as one of the favorites in the Western Conference.
Okay, so let me take it a step further.
Take a breath. That was a lot.
That was a lot. The guys are telling me I talked for like 9 straight minutes. So
Something like that.
apologies for flashbacks to Mark Willard, I suppose.
It's fine. I'm used to it.
I
sent a couple of emails. I actually took a couple of calls.
Marks are going to mark, am I right?
Marks.
I had to, the whole history of the OKC organization, Sam Presti, the busiest man in the NBA. I had to get a lot of that out. But I got to go even a little bit further here, because
even further?
I'm kind of dancing around the final
I might
point
clip my
here.
nails. Go ahead.
I'm kind of dancing around what is the end game at this point, okay? I do not want the Golden State Warriors to trade Steph Curry. I would never want that to happen.
Well, then what did we do? What did you do 9 minutes for then? For God's
give me
sakes.
a break. Give me another 3, okay?
You trade Kevon and you get 4 firsts. There it is.
It's not quite like it's not a Steiny like Steph Curry's the best thing to happen in my career. Like
I hate the cackle in there too.
I'm not old enough and haven't been in this business long enough to have capitalized on Steph Curry's career for my own career. But Steph Curry has given me some of the best moments in my life. Like, that's not even an overstatement. Steph Curry has been one of the best things to happen to me as a rabid basketball fan and as a lifelong Golden State Warrior fan. There are few things that have happened in my life that are better than Stephen Curry on the Golden State Warriors, okay? I could not handle it emotionally if Steph Curry was no longer a Warrior. I want him to ride off into the sunset as a Golden State Warrior. That's the storybook ending that he deserves. As a result, the Warriors would never trade him. They would never be the reason that he gets traded. Because if they did, they would face hell from me and the rest of the fan base, and it would be a disaster. It would be end of the world. The Warrior fans would go absolutely ballistic if the Warriors were to trade Stephen Curry. They would never even consider it. We all know this. Stephen Curry is a made man to the nth degree. He's the best thing that has ever happened to this organization, and no player will ever mean more to the Warriors than Steph Curry has. With all of that said, I think the quickest and the most sure path for the Warriors to being competitive once again is if Steph Curry goes to the front office and says, trade me. Because what that does is it gives the Warriors front office cover to trade away Stephen Curry. There will still be upset fans, incredibly upset fans, but it's not the Warriors organization that forced Stephen Curry out. It's Steph Curry saying, hey, we're not good enough. I want to try to win one more before I retire. And I'm going to help you out by getting some return, and this will make your future 2-3 years down the road brighter as a result. Again, I don't think it's ever in a million years going to happen, but Dibbs, I can't shake the feeling that in my heart, in my mind, the Warriors' best chance to be good, not necessarily this season, but 2-3 years down the road, is if Steph Curry approaches the Warriors front office and says, fellas, it's been a hell of a ride, but I got to go.
This take started at 4:20, which is appropriate because you must be high. Thank you. Laugh into the mic, Randy, because I know you're not high. You don't get down like that, but it's an interesting notion in that it would allow fans to say, oh, well, Steph, so now they're going to turn on Steph for wanting to be traded, and Steph's going to fall on the sword and say, I want to compete for a title and we're not close, and so I'm going to go ahead and make it easy on you, Lacob and Dunleavy, and I'm going to request a trade. The problem is you're not going to get a Paul George-like haul or even a Russell Westbrook haul when you got basically 4 first-round picks. You got 2 firsts and 2 first swaps that you were able to enact in the future. Steph's not going to be able to command that at this point. I don't know if and again, May 10th, if Steph goes to the front office and says, I want out, trade me before the draft, are they getting 4 first-round picks for Steph? I doubt it.
Probably not.
So I don't even know if that would allow you to reboot the franchise like Oklahoma City was able to do. And again, the OKC rebuild, it took 8 years. And it took Paul George and Westbrook.
I'm not sure it took 8 years. The Paul George acquisition was a win-now move. And then they traded him 2 years after that.
Right. Well, it was a win now, and then it didn't work, and so then they had to reboot again. The point is, from when they were a really good winning team to when they are now again a really good winning team, it was 8 years. And that's actually pretty fast for a team to have a rebuild like that, to go from really good back to being really good again.
888-957-9570. If you missed any of the last 20 minutes when
Just
I started this
payoff, I want Steph out.
That's not what I said. The reason it took so long is because I didn't want that out.
You want me to help you? Here, I'm Marc Grandi. I want Steph to want out.
Thank you. I want you to want out.
I think that the Warriors, there is a reality in which the best move for the Golden State, or the best thing that could happen for them to be competitive in the future, is Steph Curry approaching the front office and say, I would like a trade. I am sure that most Warrior fans think I'm out of my freaking mind, so call in and tell me why. 888-957-9570. Now, emotionally, I couldn't handle it, and I think most of you would also agree. But do you actually think that this Warriors roster is going to win you a championship? Do you actually think that? And maybe you're okay knowing that they probably won't, and you're just going to hold on to for the vibes, for the memories, for the history of it all. And that's totally fine. But if your only undying goal is to try to win and be really good, I don't see it happening given the advanced age of the players on your roster. And what do you do then? You say, all right, let's help ourselves out 3 years from now.
3 years from now, it would probably be 7 years from now, or even longer.
You don't have to necessarily take the return you get for someone like that and only pick players with those draft picks. You could pull a Minnesota Timberwolves, who then traded a number of their picks and got a player ready to help you win now in Rudy Gobert. Now, you could hate Rudy Gobert as a player, and you could say, I would never want the Warriors to acquire him. Sure, I might agree with you. But you can use picks that you get in these trades to trade for a younger, developing player who's already in the NBA.
If you trade Steph Curry, you're going to be trying to either draft or trade for another Steph Curry. And that's the problem with all this, is that no matter what you do to try to get better, if you trade a good player, you're trying to replace him with another good player. And right now you've got one of the 15 best players in the league.
Yeah.
And by trading him at 36, I don't think you're going to get the ROI that you're looking for.
Yeah, you're probably right. I'm pretty positive you are right, but I can't shake the feeling watching what OKC is doing, and I know it's a little bit of an anomaly. But I do think there is some sound logic behind this idea. It's never going to happen, but I do think there is some sound logic behind it. And part of this, and we can get into it on the other side, is the pressures of being a small market team. It's easier for OKC to make these kinds of moves because they are dealing with pressures that the Warriors aren't dealing with. And we can talk about how that factors into all of this on the other side, and we will get to your calls. 888-957-9570. Line up to yell at Grandi. I'm here for it. It's coming up on the other side. We are sponsored by Fremont Bank, full service banking.